extremism to humanism, we do recognize that we are faced with challenges of shrinking civic spaces, threats to humanists and human rights defenders, rise of populist politics, and repressive regimes enforcing repressive laws in different parts of the world. Nonetheless, we are also in a time when the global humanist movement is growing worldwide, and there is a potential for humanism to provide a blueprint for transforming violent extremism using non-militarized, non-securitarized, human rights-based approaches. While we speak about what role humanism can play in countering violent extremism, I understand that it's very important that first we talk about what is actually violent extremism, how we can counter and prevent violent extremism, and then what role humanism has to play in that countering and preventing strategies. So I wanted to start by kind of like defining it, because violent extremism is one of the biggest challenges of our time. But what is violent extremism? There is not a single global definition that encompasses all facets of violent extremism. And there isn't a single definition of the issue because the issue is very complex in itself. The contexts in which violent extremism movements are thriving are very complex and very diverse. When I was a young person growing up in my village, I saw discrimination against young women. I grew up seeing that how you were less worthy if you were a woman, or if you were a girl, you were less worthy. I saw that how when the birth of boys would be cherished, how boys would go to better schools, how the birth of girls will be a matter of disappointment for parents, a matter of shame for the mothers and for the parents. That was the kind of culture that I grew up. But at the same time, when I was feeling less worthy because I was a woman, because I was a girl, I was feeling less worthy. At the same time, because my mother was the only entrepreneur in the village, she used to do embroidery using machine. That was a very unique skill back then in our village. So women from all over the villages would come to our home to kind of like ask my mother to do embroidery for them. And that was my opportunity when I would listen to the stories of women. And one thing that I found common in the stories that women would share with my mother in that home was that they were asked, the woman would be told to stay silent. Silence was a matter of heroism. If women were beaten by their husbands, and if they stay silent about it, if they just bear the abuse, they would be the best role model woman. But if they were speaking against the abuse, they would be considered like the bad women who are ruining the respect of their whole family. Like, what is the need of shouting when your husband beats? Just stay silent and save the respect of the family. That was a kind of, and that used to bother me a lot. And at the same time, it was a time period when I would see wall chalking on the walls of my village, calling for recruitment in jihad, calling for joining trainings, because there was a jihad happening in Afghanistan back then. And because there was a jihad happening in Afghanistan, I'm sorry, kind of like using the jargons, by jihad happening in Afghanistan, I mean that while the US and the Russia were fighting in Afghanistan, jihad and Islam was used as a tool to brainwash people and to train them into militancy, send them to Afghanistan to fight against Russia. So most of those recruitments and trainings were happening in Pakistan, in my own very region. So most of the recruitments, a lot of recruitments were happening from my own neighborhood. I grew up watching television series where we would be told that how Muslims are victimized all around the world. If you come from Pakistan, you would remember that how those ads of the how Muslims in Kashmir are becoming victims and what is happening in Palestine. So the kind of narrative which was fed to me as a child was that my Muslim identity is under threat, and therefore it is my duty to go and fight against it. And I wanted to go and fight. I wanted to do jihad because that was the kind of narrative that I was fed with. But the only problem was my father. He was a peace activist and he didn't want us to go to jihad. So we would actually go upstairs, sit in a circle, and we would pray to God that may God show straight paths to my father. so that he can let us go for jihad, And then one day I was sitting with my mother and I was telling her that, people who will go to jihad and they can take all of their siblings to the heaven with them and stuff like that. And my father overheard me, and that was the time that he realized that he needs his peace activism inside his own home. He needs to save his own children before saving the rest of the world. And he started working with me. When he realized that his own children are actually getting indoctrinated with the very same ideology which he's fighting outside the home. So he started educating us, and he started organizing actually the components that I talk about, especially the component in which I talk about the humanization of others. It is so important. That was what my father did for me. He started organizing meetings for me with people of different ideologies and different faiths. I started meeting with free thinkers, with political activists, with feminists, with liberals, with Marxists, with everyone. And that was the time that I started humanizing others. And then finally, I met a mother whose child was taken away. That happened, the kind of, in madrasa what happens, children go to madrasa to read Quran, and we have always been told that God comes first, parents come later. So in those madrasas, in one of those madrasas, he got indoctrinated and he was told that he need to go to jihad and he does not need his parents' permission. And the mother didn't know where the son has gone. And it was after a few months, the mother received dead body of her only son. And that was the tears in the eyes of that mother that shook me, and that was the point where I realized that no, that's not what I want to become. I don't want to kill and I don't want to be killed. That's my thing. And that was my point of transformation. And that's how that in that culture where oppression was normal, I became a different person, and I decided that I will do something different. And then it was also added up. It's a lot of work to become a humanist in culture like Pakistan. I also, a lot of the credit goes to a 2-month summer leadership course, which I attended. And that was organized by human rights activists in Pakistan. And it helped us to unlearn many the norms that we learn in our society. It helped us unlearn those things, and it gave us critical thinking skills. And it was the critical thinking skills education in that course which enabled me to start questioning religion, to start questioning system, to start questioning patriarchy. So that's why I said it's a long story of how I was if it wasn't my father or hearing me talking to my mother about how I also want to go to jihad, and if I had the opportunity to listen again and again to the extremist narrative, and if there was an opportunity, I might have joined. And therefore, I believe that the opportunities that I was presented with, if we present those opportunities to other young people, we can save them. And that's why through the Youth Peace Network, we are presenting those opportunities to young people. Now, coming to your question on whether a transformative religion can help us, I think there are already so many definitions and interpretations of religion that exist out there. But those who promote and the masterminds of extremist ideologies, they know how to play with it. They know how to play with the interpretations. You will always, this is my very personal opinion, but you will always find something in religion which which supports the violent ideologies. So there will be always something out there. And they also take it from the same history. When we say that giving a different interpretation, what we actually do is that we do the cherry picking of the nice stuff and do an interpretation. And what the militants are doing is that they do cherry picking of the violent stuff and they present their interpretation. Now both are right. But both of them have done cherry picking. One has done cherry picking from the violent aspect, other have done cherry picking from the non-violent aspect. Therefore, I think that instead of using a dogma, why do you use a dogma to ask people that don't engage in violence? enable our young people and our children to be critical, to raise questions. And once they are critical, they will be able to prevent themselves not only from a jihadist group, but also from gang violence, also from fascist politics, also from populist politics. The world is now very complicated. Our only issue in violent extremism is not just jihad, it's also different kind of supremacies and fascism. So if people have the critical thinking skills, they will be able to make better ethical choices.
Thank you. Introductions. Well, I'd like to start really by thanking everyone in New Zealand humanists and Humanists for making us so welcome here in Auckland and also at the parliamentary reception in Wellington, which we enjoyed very much. I was asked to speak about, take a topic from this book on secularism that was published last year, and I was asked about a year ago when the topic of this conference was going to be the particular difficulties in promoting humanism in very non-religious societies, which is why I decided to talk on the non-religious arguments against secularism. It's not because this is a particular obsession of mine, or that I think that the arguments are particularly strong, or that I'm trying to argue against secularism, as some shocked correspondents suggested before the conference. It's because I think it is an interesting question as to why, in societies like New Zealand, or in societies like the UK, and the UK is the most extreme example of this, where people, in terms of their beliefs, in terms of their practices, in terms of their identities, are overwhelmingly non-religious, why it is in such societies that nonetheless religious establishments, religious states, non-secular states can continue to persist, and not just persist but be very, very strong. The UK is probably in the top 3 non-religious societies in terms of people in the world, but it has the most Christian state in the world in terms of its law, constitution, and policy. Why is this? Well, secularism has many definitions, so I think it's worth just rehearsing for you the definition that I'm going to use. What is secularism in terms of politics and the state? A secular state has religious institutions separate from the institutions of the state. So it's a separation. But it's more than that, because the secular state doesn't just keep religious and state institutions separate. It actively tries to secure freedom of thought, conscience and religion for its citizens, or anyone who finds themselves within the borders of the state, up to, of course, the limits of the rights and freedoms of others. Because we can only enjoy in a liberal society our freedoms up to when they start interfering with other people's freedoms, of course. And the secular state also is one that seeks not to discriminate between people on the basis of their religion or non-religious.
In 2016, the Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, appealed to all citizens to stop the abuse of women and children, because charitable organisations have reported that they have so many unwanted babies left at their residences that they can no longer cope with them. A 2017 Global Health School survey found high drug and alcohol abuse and early sexual activity amongst young teenagers. Almost half of children under the age of 14 have consumed alcohol and drugs and had sex. So the stats were that 49% of students said they'd consumed alcohol before the age of 14, 57% of students admitted to having drugs before they were 14, and 48% had already had sex by the time they were 14, 12% had smoked. It would appear that these inappropriate behaviours are having a secularising effect. Just last week, a government minister was cited in the Fiji Times saying that in his view, children are losing interest in religious education and knowledge. But there is also a lot of superstition.
People, and they were all online, unfortunately. So everyone was online. So they were all on a place called Reddit. Anyone know Reddit? Yeah. Okay, surprising mix of age demographics there, actually. Yes. But Reddit is like a big kind of space with lots of little groups as well that make it up. And one of these groups was the ex-Muslim subreddit. At the time, we had 1,800 people. I was one of them. I was a solid 0.18% of the group. We now have 36,000 people. Just shows you how quickly things are. That was 5 years ago. So what I started doing is realizing, wait, there's all these online people, but I'm like a human person. Like, we're all human people. We like to meet each other and all that. So I said, let me try to meet people. But imagine, you thought only 3 months ago you were alone, and there's this whole, like, people trying to, like, kill you thing. So you're a bit like, what do I do? How do I do this? Because I'm in the closet at the time. So I remember my first time trying to meet an ex-Muslim from online. It was in King's Cross, you know King's Cross in London? Big station. Harry Potter, well known for, during one of his psychedelic trips, he tried to get into a magical city through the pillar. So King's Cross, I met him at King's Cross, and it was at a coffee shop, in a coffee shop, I think Starbucks. And I remember I got one of my non-Muslim friends from uni. I said to her, can you sit there and text me a picture of the guy so I know he's all right? And so she did that to me, and obviously it's completely stupid, but at the time I was terrified, right? So I met the guy, and he was this ex-Muslim guy. He was my first person to meet as well. He was mine. And yeah, so since then, I set up groups. The first group was in London. But yeah, New Zealand's ex-Muslim group is a very interesting one, actually, because I'd set up other groups around the world. There's one in Australia I set up, but the Americans I set up with them rather than I set that up. New Zealand was the first that I had no idea existed, and then they kind of got in touch with me, and I was like, oh my god, you're doing similar things with what we're doing around the world. So it was very cool. Now, what happened was I started realizing that the problems ex-Muslims had were so standardized across all leaving religion stories. And Faithless really started about 4 years ago, in fact, because I was in my kitchen with an ex-Hasidic Jewish friend, ultra-Orthodox Jewish friend, and we were laughing because our parents were the same. And that's when I was like, wow, this is much bigger than the ex-Muslim issue. So often, and this comes back to this idea of apostasy and danger, often when people think about apostasy, they look at death threats as the real problem. And yes, that's a massive issue. I mean, as you've heard before, that death is a problem. I've had a few death threats myself. But to be honest, if you're in Pakistan, the range of death threats you're going to get is very different from if you're in London. But actually, the way I try to explain apostasy discrimination, if you didn't want to think about it, is to compare it to LGBT discrimination. When we talk about gay people being discriminated, we don't talk about them being burned off buildings. That's a problem. But really, we talk about the whole range of things. We talk about people being discriminated at work. We talk about people being looked at funny at school, being bullied. It's the whole gamut of things. And with apostasy, we don't do that yet. And I want that conversation to move so it can include people like the Maoris who are, being atheists in your own community. Maybe no one's going to stab you. Or, I don't know what the death threat situation is in our culture, but you want them to be included in that because that's discriminatory. So, like a little bit of the kind of problems that people face, if you speak to, I deal with a lot of ex-Muslims from Saudi Arabia because it produces a lot of ex-Muslims. And believe it or not, theocracies, who knew? And even they speak about shunning, they speak about family, they even speak about, I don't want to hurt my mother. I remember this one boy I was dealing with in Iraq, he's from a Shia background, and the Shia, like, people think, oh, they're cool. No, they're just as bad when it comes to high control. They can be just as bad. And he was running away from he was in threat because the Shia militia were going to kill him for being an atheist. They saw him in some protests. And he couldn't leave Iraq because he's like, I love my mother, I can't leave her here. So imagine in that situation, the problems are still family related. And this is the problem with apostasy. People forget family issue is the biggest issue in many cases. So it all sounds a little bit negative maybe, but I want to put a positive spin to it. I'm an irrationally optimistic person, and I think what we found with apostates was we knew we were scum. Like, no one cares about apostates. No media organization picks us up or any of that. So apostates started to build their own groups. They forget about the wider world. We'll do our own thing. Jehovah's Witnesses organized. Ex-Hasidic Jewish people organized. We organized. And we started fighting for our own rights in this way, right? And slowly, people are listening. So just last week, there was a film called Apostasy. Anyone hear about it? Yeah, Apostasy. Ex-Jehovah's Witness director it is probably going to win for Sundance. It's doing very well. And it's a film that's good in its own right. It's about leaving the Jehovah's Witness Church, right? And 2 months ago, Netflix, anyone know Netflix? Yes. Released a documentary called One of Us. Anyone seen that documentary, One of Us? Yeah? It's about people leaving the Hasidic Jewish community, ultra-Orthodox community. And if something's on Netflix and it does well, you know that this is an area they're going to continue pumping out things about, because they've got all these algorithms and stuff. So the fact is that things are going well, and Faith to Faithless, we've been featured in documentaries. We've been in 4 documentaries up till now. I was in a Vice documentary, we've done a few BBC things. Just coming here, we had a couple of interviews with New Zealand radio stations. So we're part of that as well, right? So what is Faith to Faithless? We're a program of Humanists UK. I always, well, not always, because I didn't even know what a humanist was. When I figured out what a humanist is and figured out what Humanists UK is doing, realized, wait, there's a natural collaboration, and we both realized, actually, Humanists UK did as well, between the humanists and people who suffer for leaving high-control religious groups. And historically, humanism actually was often full of those people leaving Christian churches. But today, you get second-generation, third-generation humanists, but there's a natural collaboration there. And so what does Faith to Faithless actually do? Like, I think the first thing is, going back to my story, I was the only person. This is a common story. You speak to all the ex-Muslims on that table, they'll say the same. You speak to ex-Christians, a lot of them from high-control groups will say the same. If you're from, is it Gloria Vale? Is that a cult thing, apparently, in the South? Yeah, so they will say probably the same. They'll say, I didn't know you could leave it. So the first thing we do is outreach. We do panels normally. Let's say there's 3 people, they've never spoken, they're often shaking, and they'll tell their stories. And because it's so raw, because it's so real, it's a really like emotional story. And we film them, we put them on YouTube, and they do quite well. The second thing we do is, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's important, because often people don't leave, and they suffer because they don't know you can leave. So I remember once, one of the videos, I think it was a personal video for ex-Muslims I did, and there was a kid who commented on it saying something a bit angry, like you get lots of crazy YouTube comments. And I think I messaged something, but I got bored or I got distracted and I didn't. And then 2 months later I felt kind of bad, so I kind of messaged back going, taking his points much more like nicely. And he goes, oh no, I didn't even know you could leave, I've left Islam. 2 months later. So he was like, yeah, don't need to debate me, I'm my ex-Muslim. So this happens time and time again. And one of the coolest things about the videos we do is, because we put them on YouTube and the way the algorithms work, you'll be like a little Jehovah's Witness kid.
Because I think last day I speak it clearly that what we do that thing. and because we are officially recognized organization by the government, so I don't know if we change the name. I don't know if there is a problem. I mean, in my country, I can't change the name, obviously, to easy. I can't. But in website, I don't know about that. But actually, we took the name with humanistic, and we recognize the Amsterdam Declaration as our core values, and also in our bylaws of organizations, we take humanism as the first purpose. So then, okay, some people are concerned that if it's a bit joking or what, but I mean, we are the only one organization who work with humanism and atheism, this kind of field. And if you exclude us by this reason, there would be no chance for us. And yeah, that's what I want to say. And then we are really serious about things. That's why they support me to here. It needs money, it needs resources. And we also translate Amsterdam Declaration in Chinese. That's how we work to IHEU before. And we hold 2016 Asian Humanism Conference. And in this year, we also held by our group. That's what we want to contribute to the humanism in Asia and IHEU's works. So this is my defense. So hope is satisfied. Or if you have more questions, I will glad to answer more clearly.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. And I hope that